Hello and welcome back, everyone, to Demystifying Spiritual Practices. Today, I have a great friend with me, Lane Arnold, and she is going to talk about something that you might not have considered to be a spiritual practice. Lane is a writer, an editor, a book coach, a spiritual director, all sorts of things. So that's only part of you, I'm sure. That's all I know at this point. But do you want to tell us anything else about yourself and what you do?
Well, it's good to be here with you today, Sue. Well, I am all the things she said and some more as well. I was a former elementary school teacher. I am a person who loves delight. I have loved lament too as a companion in long seasons of suffering. And I love to encourage people. So that's part of what I do. I am a wife, a mother. I have 3 grown children and 2 stepchildren, as well as 7 grandchildren, and we're waiting on the 8th that is supposed to be born today. So pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
And I have been a spiritual director for about 16 years. I hold a certificate in Christian formation and soul care from Denver Seminary, and I have training in the giving of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius through the Jesuit Institute of South Africa in conjunction with the Martin Institute at Westmont College. But my favorite things to do is laugh and to play on the beach and to eat dark chocolate and raspberries and dance in the kitchen. So that's a
That's
little bit
awesome.
about me.
Yeah, I love that. And it's the incongruence that we sometimes feel that spiritual people need to be serious people. And so, yeah, I love that. Um, how would you, as an expert on these things, define a spiritual practice?
I love that question because I think a spiritual practice sounds so solemn and so serious, but I think it really is about creating space for me, for you, for us to participate in holy habits, habits that change us, change our interior landscape, and habits that help us partner better with God for the restoration and transformation of our heart. I think it really is about the fact that whatever I think about forms me. And so I want my holy habits to be something that help me move towards the heart of God and away from the kingdom of me, myself, and I. Although that's a kingdom I'm pretty comfortable in.
Right? Are we? Yeah.
Uh,
I love that idea of just of making space
yeah,
and
yeah,
sort of just turning in a direction.
yeah. And, I think we talk about spiritual practices, and sometimes we forget what their purposes are. So I think about how fasting, as an example, is a great spiritual practice that helps me retrain myself from instant gratification into a dependence on God
Mhm.
at the moment of my hunger. And so my hunger could be about food, or it could be about binge watching or overbuying or whatever it's about. But the practice of fasting puts me in a position of allowing some transformation to occur within me.
Mm, mhm.
And I think it's a lot like learning a new language or getting in physical shape. We take up habits that help us do that.
Right.
If I'm going to learn a new language, I've got to um, begin to understand what that language is. I've got to practice it. I've got to engage with it.
Mhm.
So, what I practice helps me become what I envision.
Right. Yeah. So that I mean suggests a certain amount of intentionality. You don't drift into a deeper spiritual life typically.
If only we could, right?
Right. Yeah, I have a lot to say about drifting. I don't want to
Right.
be there anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so today specifically, I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about your spiritual practice of play and how you came to like you use that as a spiritual practice, what it means for you.
Sure. Well, I think I want to talk first about what play is, because when I tell people that I love the spiritual practice of play, they're like, that doesn't compute.
Yeah.
Like we think we have to be very, very solemn and very, very serious in this
Mhm.
life with Christ, and there are certainly places for that. But I think it's really helpful to think about what play is. Um, so just imagine for a moment that you're back being a child. Um, and when I think about my own childhood, I think about the hours that I spent out in the yard or in the park across the street. We were always splashing in the creek, or we were building forts with pillows and blankets if we were indoors, or we were swinging or climbing up into the treehouse, digging in the dirt. The play really is an unfettered activity that's very freeing.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I love the definition that Dr. Stuart Brown has for it. He wrote a book a number of years ago called Play: How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. And he says that play is a state of mind that when one is engaged in it, is so absorbed in the activity that we kind of lose track of time, that
Mhm.
it's very self-motivated, that we want to do it over and over again. It's just done for the sake of doing it
Mhm.
and being in it. It's not for a purpose, it's not for a show. It's pleasurable, it's fun.
Mhm.
Um, and when I think about that definition, that's really the way I want to be with God. I want to be in a place of kind of timelessness, delight, freedom, a
Mhm.
lightness and exuberance.
Mhm.
Um, and I want to be absorbed and lost in time enjoying God's presence.
Mhm.
So play helps me move into that space.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think probably the next thing that I could move into is, how did I even get started on
Yeah, yeah, I'd like to hear.
that? So I met Jesus through the ministry of Young Life. And Young Life is a ministry that really has an approach to the good news of Jesus with a lot of playfulness. There's laughter, there's songs, there's skits, there's storytelling. Of course, there's also Bible study and prayer and scripture memory, but it really is a place of joy. And so it started out that my experience of Jesus, my literal experience of meeting Jesus, was full of joy through the ministry of Young Life and through my encounter with Jesus. And so that was so different than what I had grown up with in church. I
Mhm.
knew all the right things,
Right.
but I didn't have that experience of joy.
Mm. Mhm. And that came as you met the person of Jesus,
It did.
outside of like all the things you're supposed to believe.
Right, right.
Mm.
I think another reason that play has been part of my life is that in another lifetime, I was an elementary school teacher.
Mm. Mhm.
And so, as an elementary school teacher, like, we're pretty good at kind of just being able to do things on the fly. Like, if we want kids to jump into things, we say, let's jump in.
Yeah.
And I also had 3 children of my own. So I was teaching kids during the day, and I had kids home at night and, weekends and summers. And what I really started to notice again was that when I engaged wholeheartedly in play as a mother, as a teacher, or as a friend or an aunt or, cousin, whatever, I just noticed a lightness in me.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was a way of not taking myself quite so seriously.
Mhm. And I think your even just the openness to be able to play indicates a certain view of who God is.
Mm.
So maybe can you expand on that? Like what gives you the freedom before God to be that way? Like what's your view of God that allows that, I guess is what I'm trying
Yeah.
to say.
Well, I love that. I mean, I love that question. I think, gosh, that's one I might have to incorporate into spiritual direction. Um, I think part of it is I feel safe. I
Mhm,
feel at home.
mhm,
There really is a sense of family. This is the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, but it's a place I belong.
right.
And in that place of belonging, there's a lot of freedom.
Mm,
There's a sense of delight and able to release, kind of everything that could be pretense because I'm known, because I'm
mm,
loved.
that's beautiful. Yeah, and freeing. One thing you said, it was probably a couple years ago, um, and it was challenging to me to hear this, but like, I'm God's favorite. And it was just like, what? We can say that? And so that speaks to like your knowledge that God delights in you.
Yeah,
And so that you're freed up to delight in life and your relationship with Him.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. I think it is. It's that piece, and it's also. I was thinking about this recently. It's also the piece of how I love and know and really believe with all my heart in the big story that God is writing, that He has crafted. And that I know that we started in Eden and that there will be another Eden, that there will be the renewal of all things. And so I live in this bigger story, which is really a witness to the resurrection of Christ. And so in that place, that's joy,
Mm,
that's hope. Now, I am the first to tell you, I've had a ton of suffering in my life and still live in a place with quite a bit of suffering for one reason or another. It actually has probably pushed me into the place of thinking, what is a way that God wants to grow me in grace to help me in these places of lament? It's not to shove that under the rug, but it's also to say, I can be both and. I can hold joy and I can hold sorrow.
yes.
And I think
Yeah.
it comes about because we have a God who's playful.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I feel like there's a sense of mm, almost humility to that. Like you can you can play. You've given this freedom because it's not all up to you. You don't have to save the world. You don't have to whatever we think we have to do. Where it's almost an idea like similar to rest, that it's not something we have to earn or anything, or um, it's a gift of being a child, of a loved child of God.
I think that's exactly right. And I think we see Jesus interacting with children. And
Mhm,
and you see that he loved them, that he welcomed them, that he really honored them. He said, "Let the little children come to me." And then he took them in his arms and he held them and he blessed them. That was a really delightful place, especially in a society that didn't necessarily honor that position about children.
right. Yeah. Hmm. So, what have you noticed as you've incorporated play into your kind of rhythms of life?
Well, I think I've noticed that it's taken an attitude of attentiveness to stay there. Like,
Mhm,
I can get really serious. I can go back. I would consider myself now a fairly contemplative person and with a quieter,
mhm,
unhurried life, but
mhm,
I can go into a type A person again if I am not careful.
mhm,
And so I think play is one of the things that helps me um, step away from that rush.
mhm,
And so I notice that when I stay in this attitude of play, it helps me go a little slower, be more present to the moment.
right. Mhm.
And
A
I think it's
humility.
partly, what you said earlier about children and humility. There's this place of um, children are really in touch with, I'm not in charge of the universe, but they also are somehow so present to the moment at hand that they don't get caught up in everything else. And so when I can move myself into that space of play, I can release a lot of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, be present in the moment, not dwelling in the past, not forecasting into the future, but being right there. Yeah, yeah, awesome. Um, so, um, do you think that because you experience those things, you experience being present and noticing things more, the freedom, the timelessness that you talk about, are those incentives to bring you back to keep practicing? Or is it something that like you just have to just put on your calendar and almost, yeah, decide to do? Um, because we know that things are good for us, but we're not always consistent in doing them. So I just wondered how you kept that consistency in that practice.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a both and for me. I
Mm,
think it's keeping an attitude of playfulness and kind of looking for those hidden moments of, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. And I could go to anger, bitterness, or I could go to complete silliness.
mm,
And it's letting that be a choice of I want my heart to find kind of the ridiculousness in the moment
yeah.
when you're just like so frustrated with something, and then you can just almost double over in laughter, like, this is so absurd. Like,
Yes.
this is just beyond absurd. But I think
Mhm,
it's also, inviting curiosity.
mm,
It's really staying along with curiosity, being curious about what is that butterfly doing? Or, what are those clouds? They look like this. And then, well, I wonder why I'm thinking about seahorses or
mm,
dinosaurs.
mhm,
But it's staying curious. And it's also, I think, putting it on the calendar, even like with a sense of I'm gonna have a play date with God, you know.
mhm,
I'm you we talk sometimes as artists, as creatives, I'm gonna go
mm,
have an artist date.
mhm,
I think we can do the same with God. We can say, I want to go play with God. I want to go just, walk down to the creek and splash. I want to go jump in a puddle.
mhm,
Um, I want to be in a position where it's not about doing, but about being.
yeah, yeah,
So
and
let me ask you this.
mm,
What would the biggest challenge be for you to begin to incorporate play as a spiritual discipline?
yeah. I think there's still a lot of the whole idea of what will people think? You know, uh, I did have an experience, was it a year or so ago, where it was playful. It wasn't, I wouldn't consider it play, but I was playful in a little stream and I was alone and I felt like it was a conversation with God. And so I could, open my arms wide just to take it all in and splash. And um, I don't know if I'd have that freedom if there were other people around. So um, I guess it, that is something that I would need to get over.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's helped me is I have some friends that are as crazy as I am. You know, they sort of expect me to be a little weird, and I expect them
Mhm.
to be a little weird, and we kind of keep each other in that. And
Nice.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's probably helpful that I was an elementary school teacher, um,
Hmm.
because we are uh, kind of known for being a little bit silly and a little bit spur of the moment what was happening. And then I think again for me, having grandchildren um, really has brought that out because so often I'm engaged with them in this type of an environment because they don't
Yeah.
all excuse me right I do.
Mm.
So if they're like feeling really sad and we'll talk for a while and then they're like, well, Gran, what have you seen lately? And I'll be like, well, let's see. lately I've seen a flamingo, you know, and then we're just laughing.
Yeah.
And and they're telling me what's going on in their world, and they're telling me the hard things, but they're also telling
Mm,
me the silly things.
mhm.
So I think it is really helpful to find other people to laugh with. And I also believe the older I get, the more free I get. At 70, I don't care a whole lot about what
Yeah.
people think because I've
Yeah.
lived a lot of life, and I'm sort of at another stage where I'm pretty alive and free. Um, but I think it really is about how do we choose to be intentional to take time to color or play with blocks or um, jumping puddles.
Yeah.
And I do keep things around in my office and down the hall. I've got some blocks. Of course, I've got grandchildren who come over, so I have those things. But I'll get out the magnetic blocks and play with them, and that's just great creative play for our minds and
Yes.
our bodies and our souls.
Mhm. Mhm. I love that. Mhm. One way I am embracing the whole idea of delight is through my work with flowers, and so that's the reason I took the job because my word of the year is delight, and I felt like I need to take every opportunity to find delight in daily life, and so which I think is connected to the whole idea of play and um, yeah.
I love that. I really do love that. And I
Mhm.
think that's part of it. I think one distinction I would love to make for people is that we can go real easily from play, being playful, to suddenly becoming more than that. So we go from, oh,
Mhm.
let's make a sand castle to let's go enter a sand building contest.
Right. Yes.
You know,
Isn't that our tendency though?
it
Like,
is our tendency. And
yeah.
and I live in a town where we have an art and school of design. And so, you'll go downtown and on the sidewalks down near the school, they'll be drawing in the chalk. And you're like, this is so fun, that they have just playful things. But then, of course, there will be a chalk drawing contest. And then
Right.
it gets really elaborate. And
Mm, mhm.
and so I think even as we enter this habit of play, we have to watch for that it doesn't become a place of competition. It isn't
Right.
like a lot of people say, I'm going to go play a sport, but I would contend that's not really playful. That's a
Right.
different category of an activity. Play
Mm,
really is more uninhibited and without a goal in mind.
right. Yeah. Which we tend not to like. We have to have a reason for doing most things.
We
Right.
do.
Yeah. And even just, I mean, I think that's what makes any spiritual discipline or practice hard is because we don't see a result immediately.
Mm,
Um, it's something that we do over and over and over without maybe evidence that a lot is changing. But having faith that what we're doing is cultivating that relationship
right.
um, and being changed as a result. But it's not like you can say, oh, I accomplished this and this and this by doing this practice. Um, so
Yeah.
would you offer any words of encouragement to people that are um, maybe struggling to incorporate something new in their practice or carry on with what they're doing?
Yeah, and well, I think what you just said is really good and important because I think it is the case that our spiritual habits are to create a space in us that we actually begin to have that as almost like muscle memory for our spiritual soul. So,
Mm,
like if I go work out at the gym or if I go play tennis, eventually my serve is going to get better or, my posture is going to get better, whatever it is. But it takes practice. But once I've done it for a while, it's almost as if my body remembers, oh, I know how to do this. I don't have to think about it. And so I think that's where play comes into this is that we begin to get in the habit of play and then it becomes something that we just begin to do a little more naturally.
Mm, mhm,
I think it's also helpful to remember again, why do we do these practices? And for me, I think for all of us, there are two things I want. I want to be like Jesus. I
mhm,
want to be so close to him. I want to be everything in me integrated into him. And so these practices just provide that spaciousness to do that. It's an
mhm,
invitation from him to draw near, and it's an invitation to me to give myself some room to allow that to happen.
mm, mhm. That's key, is making that space. Yeah,
Yeah,
making room.
for
Mhm.
sure. For sure.
Well, thank you, Lane, for your um, insights and sharing that practice with us. Um, so if I'm going to get started, is there something you suggest I try, or just something? Is it a very personal thing, do you think?
Well, I think I would start with what did you enjoy doing as a child?
Mm,
Or what makes you feel really alive and free right now? What makes you laugh? Um, what do you think of if you think, oh my goodness, I get the afternoon off from work or off from responsibilities? What would be something that would just be a little outside of the box, but that would really kind of let me kick up my heels a bit?
mm, mhm. Yeah.
And I think this um, practice of play is also tied up with awe and with
Mm,
wonder and with celebration. And I think we're also in need of knowing how to celebrate, in
for
need
sure.
of having that be part of it. So play and celebration and awe and wonder are kind of all tied up in together. And so I think you can begin to think, okay, well, what brings me to a place of awe?
Mm,
Is
mhm.
it watching the stars at night? Is it going to sit by a stream and just watch the swans or the birds that fly by?
Yeah.
Um, what creates curiosity in me?
Mm,
And
mhm.
let that be something that guides you in those first few steps.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right. Elaine has been gracious and she has a resource that we will put the link to in the show notes. Um, and you can start your own practice of play. And we'd love to hear comments under this video if you decide you're going to adopt this, and your stories. So I'd love to hear that. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Lane.
Thanks for having me. It was great fun.